The noon sun beat mercilessly upon the dusty streets of Austin, Texas, as Nora Matthews stood trembling on the auction block, her dignity stripped away like the fine dresses she once wore. Just 3 weeks after burying her husband, she found herself being sold to pay off his gambling debts she hadn't even known existed until the creditors came knocking at her door with armed men and legal papers that might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, a place where a woman alone had few rights and even fewer protections. Nora clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders despite the summer heat, her knuckles white with tension as the auctioneer rattled off the terms of her servitude. 1 year of labor to whomever placed the highest bid, legal slavery in all but name, dressed up in the respectability of contract law. $5, called a voice from the gathered crowd, followed by jeers and laughter. 10, shouted another. Nora kept her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the crowd, refusing to look at the faces of the men who were bidding on her as if she were livestock. She was 24 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, she'd believed she was living a comfortable life with a successful husband. Now she understood that Edward's mercantile business had been failing for years, his gambling debts mounting and his lies multiplying. $20 for the widow, called a portly man whose face was flushed red with whiskey and sun. Now, gentlemen, the auctioneer drawled, Mrs. Matthews here is educated, can keep accounts, and is known to be a fine cook. Surely she's worth more than $20 for a year's service. 25. Called another voice, and Nora finally allowed her gaze to drift toward the crowd, needing to see the faces of the men who might become her master. The bidding continued, rising slowly as men assessed her worth with calculating eyes. $50, $60, $75. $100, called a new voice, deep and commanding. The crowd parted slightly, and Nora saw him for the first time. He stood taller than most of the men around him, his broad shoulders wrapped in a worn leather duster despite the heat. The brim of his hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened by stubble. A stranger she would have remembered seeing a man like him before in Austin. $125, countered the portly man who'd bid 20 earlier. $150, the cowboy responded without hesitation. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with excitement as the price climbed higher than anyone had anticipated. $150 for the widow. Do I hear more? $175, called another man, a rancher Nora recognized from the edge of town. His reputation made her stomach clench with dread. $200, the cowboy said, his voice remaining steady and unhurried. A murmur ran through the crowd. $200 was more than many men earned in 6 months. The bidding slowed but didn't stop. $250, the rancher wasn't giving up. $300. The cowboy didn't even raise his voice. The crowd fell silent. $300 was an unheard of sum for a year's servitude, even for a young, capable woman. The auctioneer looked around eagerly, but even the rancher seemed to have reached his limit. $300 going once, going twice. $400, the rancher spat, his face contorted with anger and determination. The cowboy stepped forward then, and Nora could finally see his face clearly. Steel blue eyes met hers for a brief moment, and something in them made her breath catch. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with features that might have been carved from stone. $500, he said, his gaze never leaving Nora's face. The crowd gasped. The rancher cursed and spat in the dust but didn't counter. The auctioneer, practically salivating at the unexpected windfall, quickly brought down his gavel. Sold. To the gentleman for $500. The cowboy approached the auction block, pulling a leather pouch from inside his duster. He counted out the money while the auctioneer eagerly prepared the papers that would give him ownership of Nora's time for the next year. When the transaction was complete, the auctioneer handed the cowboy the contract with a congratulatory smile. "She's all yours, mister. Name's Vaughn, isn't it?" "Isaac Vaughn," the cowboy confirmed, taking the paper. He turned toward Nora then, those steel-blue eyes studying her face for a long moment. Without a word, he reached out and offered his hand to help her down from the auction block. Hesitantly, Nora placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle as he guided her down the steps to stand beside him in the dust of the street. The crowd was already beginning to disperse, their entertainment concluded. "Well, Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "shall we go?" "Where?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Instead of answering, Isaac Vaughn held up the contract that the auctioneer had given him. He looked at it for a moment, then with deliberate movements, tore the paper in half, and then in quarters. The crowd, which had begun to disperse, paused and turned back, murmurs of surprise rippling through them. "What are you doing?" the auctioneer demanded, stepping forward. "That contract is legally binding." "Can't be binding if it doesn't exist," Isaac replied calmly, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. He turned to Nora. "You're free to go wherever you wish, madam, though I'd be honored if you'd allow me to buy you a meal first. You look like you could use one." Nora stared at him, unable to process what had just happened. You spent $500 to free me, seems that way," he said with the faintest hint of a smile. "But why? You don't even know me." Isaac Vaughn looked at her for a long moment, then glanced around at the townspeople who were watching with undisguised interest. "Let's discuss it somewhere more private. The hotel has a decent restaurant." Still stunned, Nora nodded, and when he offered his arm, she took it, clinging to his steady strength as they walked away from the auction block. The auctioneer sputtered behind them. "This isn't legal. You can't just tear up a contract." Isaac didn't bother turning around as he called back. "Take it up with the sheriff if you want. I'll be interested to hear how he rules on selling a widow to pay her dead husband's debts." His words hung in the air, and Nora noticed how several of the onlookers looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with what they had been enthusiastically participating in moments before. The Austin Hotel's restaurant was quiet at this hour, between the lunch and dinner rushes. Isaac led Nora to a table near the back, away from the few other patrons. A waitress quickly appeared, her curious eyes darting between them. "Coffee for both of us," Isaac ordered, "and whatever's hot in the kitchen." When the waitress departed, Nora finally found her voice. "Mr. Vaughn, I don't understand why you would do this for a stranger." Isaac removed his hat and set it on an empty chair, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Without the shadow of the brim, his face appeared younger, the lines around his eyes speaking more of sun exposure than age. "I've seen what happens to women sold into service contracts," he said simply. "No one deserves that fate, especially not someone whose only crime was trusting her husband." Nora felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly to hold them back. "How did you know about my husband? Small towns have big mouths. I've been in Austin for 3 days and heard plenty about Edward Matthews' debts and his widow's predicament." He paused as the waitress returned with coffee. "Though I admit I didn't expect to see a public auction. I thought that particular practice had died out." "Officially, it has," Nora said bitterly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "This was a special arrangement made by the creditors and the mayor. They called it a labor contract negotiation, not an auction." Isaac's mouth tightened. "Politicians and their words. You still haven't explained why you would spend so much money on a stranger." He sipped his coffee before answering. Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world to last several lifetimes. When I can stop it, I do. But $500 is just money, he interrupted gently. It comes, it goes. Some things are worth more. The waitress returned with plates of stew and fresh bread. Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma reached her. She tried to eat slowly, maintaining some dignity, but it had been days since she'd had a proper meal. "What will you do now?" Isaac asked after she'd eaten half her stew. Nora set down her spoon, reality crashing back. "I don't know. The creditors took everything, the house, the store, even most of my personal belongings. They said the auction money would be the final payment to clear the debt." "You have family you can go to," she shook her head. "My parents died years ago. I have a cousin in St. Louis, but—" She trailed off, remembering the last letter she'd received from Clara, filled with complaints about her husband and 5 children crowded into a tiny apartment. "It's not really an option." Isaac nodded, seemingly understanding what she didn't say. "What about skills?" "Your auctioneer mentioned you can keep accounts." "Yes, I kept the books for Edward's store, and I can sew, cook, manage a household." She gave a hollow laugh. "All the useful skills of a wife, not necessarily an independent woman." "Those are valuable skills," Isaac countered. "The hotel might need help with their books, or one of the larger ranches. The Wilcox spread outside town is run by a widow herself. She might appreciate another woman's help." Nora looked at him curiously. "For someone who's only been in town 3 days, you seem to know a lot about Austin." A small smile touched his lips. "I make it my business to know things." "And what is your business, Mr. Vaughn? Call me Isaac, please." He leaned back in his chair. "I was a cavalry scout during the war. Now I move around, take jobs as they come. Currently, I'm delivering some horses to a ranch north of here." "You're not staying in Austin?" "No, just passing through. I'll be moving on tomorrow or the next day." Nora felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. This man had saved her from a terrible fate, and now he would disappear from her life as quickly as he had entered it. "I should find a place to stay tonight," she said, reality intruding again. "I have a few dollars sewn into my dress. Perhaps there's a boarding house that will take me until I find work." Isaac nodded. "There's Mrs. Holloway's place on Pine Street. Respectable, not too expensive. I can walk you there after we finish." "You've been very kind, Mr. Vaughn." "Isaac, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "Just promise you'll be careful. Austin might look civilized, but it has its share of wolves in sheep's clothing. Your husband's debts proved that." Nora nodded, the bitter taste of Edward's betrayal rising in her throat again. "I've learned that lesson well." After finishing their meal, Isaac insisted on paying despite Nora's protests. He escorted her to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a neat 2-story building with white curtains in the windows. The proprietress, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, eyed them suspiciously until Isaac explained the situation, or a version of it, that emphasized Nora's recent widowhood and need for respectable lodging while omitting the auction entirely. "I have a small room at the back, Mrs. Holloway said, her expression softening slightly. $3 a week, meals included." Nora did a quick calculation. Her hidden savings would cover 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she was frugal. After that, "She'll take it," Isaac said, and before Nora could protest, he discreetly pressed something into Mrs. Holloway's hand. "This should cover the first month." "Isaac, no," Nora began. "Consider it an investment in your future," he said quietly. "You can pay it forward someday when you're back on your feet." Mrs. Holloway, clearly recognizing that some kind of arrangement had been made, nodded briskly. "Come along then, Mrs. Matthews. I'll show you to your room." Isaac tipped his hat. I'll call on you tomorrow, Mrs. Matthews, to make sure you're settling in. And then he was gone, leaving Nora to follow Mrs. Holloway up a narrow staircase, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter with the mysterious cowboy who had spent a small fortune to save a woman he didn't know. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook on the wall for her meager belongings. Mrs. Holloway informed her that dinner was at 6, then left her alone with her thoughts. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day to fall. Tears of relief, of grief, of fear for the uncertain future. But mixed with all of that was a strange feeling of hope, kindled by the unexpected kindness of a stranger with steel blue eyes. True to his word, Isaac appeared at the boarding house the next morning as Nora was finishing breakfast. Mrs. Holloway showed him to the small parlor where guests could receive visitors, her expression making it clear that she would be keeping a close eye on the proceedings. "Good morning," Isaac said, hat in hand. "I trust you slept well, better than I have in weeks," Nora admitted. The relief of not being sold into servitude had allowed her to sleep deeply for the first time since Edward's death. "I've been asking around town about possible positions for you," Isaac said, getting straight to business. "The hotel doesn't need help with their books right now, but I heard the Mercantile might be looking for someone." Nora's heart sank. Fleming's Mercantile. That was my husband's biggest competitor. I doubt Mr. Fleming would want to hire Edward Matthews' widow. Not Fleming's. There's a new place opening up on the west end of town, Callahan's General Store. The owner just arrived from San Antonio and needs help getting established. Hope flickered in Nora's chest. "That might work. Thank you for asking around." Isaac nodded. "I also spoke with Mrs. Wilcox at the ranch. She said she doesn't need full-time help, but she could use someone to organize her accounts once a month or so." "You've been busy this morning," Nora said, touched by his efforts. A slight smile touched his lips. "I'm an early riser." He hesitated, then added, "I have some business to attend to today, but I could take you to meet Mr. Callahan tomorrow morning if you'd like." "I would appreciate that very much." Isaac settled his hat back on his head. "Tomorrow then, 10 o'clock. "I'll be ready," Nora promised. After he left, Nora borrowed paper and a pen from Mrs. Holloway and spent the morning writing to her cousin Clara in St. Louis, explaining her situation and asking if Clara knew of any opportunities there, just in case. She didn't mention the auction. That shame was too fresh, too deep to commit to paper. In the afternoon, she walked through town, reacquainting herself with Austin from this new perspective of independence. Edward had never encouraged her to go out alone, preferring to escort her on carefully planned outings that, she now realized, had been designed to maintain appearances while he secretly gambled away their future. The town had grown significantly since she'd arrived as a bride 6 years earlier. New buildings lined the main street, and construction was underway on what looked to be a proper bank. Austin was transforming from a frontier town to a respectable city, though it still retained much of its wild character in the saloons and gaming houses that did business alongside the churches and schoolhouses. As she passed one such establishment, the Silver Dollar Saloon, the doors swung open and a man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. He collided with Nora, grabbing her arms to steady himself. "Well, hello there, pretty lady," he slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Please let go of me," Nora said firmly, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. "Don't be in such a rush. Ain't you the widow they was auctioning yesterday? Heard some fool paid $500 just to tear up your papers." He leered at her. "Must be something special about you to fetch that price." Nora's heart raced with fear and humiliation. "Let me go this instant," Or what? The drunk laughed, pulling her closer. Or I'll put a bullet in you, came a cold voice from behind them. The drunk froze, then slowly turned his head. Isaac Vaughn stood a few paces away, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "This ain't your concern, mister," the drunk muttered, though his grip on Nora loosened. "I'm making it my concern," Isaac replied evenly. "Take your hands off the lady. Now." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty that he would follow through on his threat, made the drunk release Nora and step back, hands raised. "No harm meant," he said, backing away. "Just being friendly." "Find your friendly elsewhere," Isaac suggested, his hand still on his gun until the man had retreated back into the saloon. Nora let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, again." Isaac's expression softened as he turned to her. "Are you all right?" "Yes, just startled." She straightened her shawl, trying to regain her composure. "I thought you had business today, finished earlier than expected. I was on my way back to the hotel when I saw you." He glanced at the saloon doors. "Austin's growing, but it still has rough edges. I'm learning that." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind walking with me for a while? I was just exploring the town, but perhaps it would be safer with company." "I'd be happy to," Isaac said, offering his arm. As they walked, Nora found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something steadying about Isaac Vaughn, a quiet confidence that made her feel secure for the first time since Edward's death had upended her world. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they passed the half-built bank. "You know my unfortunate story, but I know almost nothing about you." Isaac was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Not much to tell. I grew up in Virginia, fought for the Union. After the war, I couldn't settle back into normal life, so I came west." "You have family back in Virginia," he corrected. "My parents died before the war. No siblings." "So you've been alone all this time," he glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Alone isn't always the same as lonely, Mrs. Matthews. Please call me Nora," she said. "After everything you've done, I think we can dispense with formalities." Isaac nodded. "Nora, then." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, reaching the edge of town where new construction was just beginning. In the distance, they could see the rolling hills that surrounded Austin, dotted with ranches and farms. "It's beautiful here," Nora said, taking in the view. "When Edward brought me from Philadelphia, I thought I'd never get used to all this open space. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else." "The West gets in your blood," Isaac agreed. "I've tried leaving a few times, but I always come back." "Where do you call home when you're not delivering horses?" A shadow crossed his face. "Nowhere, really. I keep moving." There was a story there, Nora sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their wounds. She was still nursing her own. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they turned back toward town. Isaac escorted her to the boarding house, pausing at the front gate. 10 o'clock tomorrow," he confirmed. "I'll be ready," Nora promised. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for today, for everything." Something flickered in his eyes, warmth, perhaps, or a hint of the man he might have been before whatever hardships had shaped him into this quiet, solitary figure. "Good night, Nora," he said simply. And then he was gone, striding down the darkening street toward the hotel. Nora watched him until he disappeared around a corner, then went inside, oddly reluctant to let the day end. The next morning, Nora dressed with care in her one good dress, a navy blue cotton that had somehow escaped the creditor's grasp. She arranged her hair neatly and pinned her mother's cameo brooch, another rescued treasure, at her throat. First impressions mattered, especially when seeking employment. Isaac arrived precisely at 10, looking more formal than she had yet seen him, in a clean shirt and vest, though he still wore his trail-worn duster over them. Something about seeing him made her heart beat a little faster, a reaction she firmly attributed to gratitude and nothing more. "You look nice," he said, a hint of appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you." Nora smoothed her skirts nervously. "I want to make a good impression on Mr. Callahan." "You will," Isaac assured her, offering his arm. Callahan's general store was still being stocked, with crates and barrels lining the walls waiting to be unpacked. A portly man with an impressive mustache was directing two young clerks when Isaac and Nora entered. "Mr. Callahan," Isaac called, and the man turned. "Ah, Mr. Vaughn." "Right on time." The store owner approached, wiping his hands on his apron. "And this must be the lady you mentioned." "Nora Matthews," Isaac confirmed. "She has experience keeping accounts and running a mercantile." Callahan extended his hand to Nora. "Pleasure, madam. Vaughn here tells me you might be interested in helping get my operation running smoothly." "I would indeed, Mr. Callahan," Nora said, shaking his hand firmly. "I kept the books for my late husband's business for several years." "Matthews." Callahan's brow furrowed. "Not Edward Matthews who ran the place down on Congress Street?" Nora felt her heart sink. "Yes, that was my husband." Callahan's expression changed, becoming more guarded. "I heard about his financial difficulties." "My husband concealed those difficulties from me," Nora said steadily, holding her head high. "I assure you, had I been aware of them, I would have taken steps to address the situation before it became so dire." Callahan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. It's actually your experience at that store that interests me. You know the suppliers, the local clientele, what sells and what doesn't in this town." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "Yes, I do." "Tell you what," Callahan said, gesturing around the half-organized store. "Help me get this place in order, inventory, accounts, suppliers, all of it, and if I'm satisfied with your work, we'll discuss a permanent position." "I would be most grateful for the opportunity," Nora said sincerely. "Can you start today?" Nora glanced at Isaac, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I can." "Excellent. Let me show you what I've got so far." Callahan led her toward a small desk in the corner that was piled high with papers. Isaac stayed for a few minutes, watching as Nora immediately began organizing the chaos of receipts and ledgers. There was a confidence in her movements, a competence that had been hidden beneath the frightened woman on the auction block. "I'll leave you to it," he said when Callahan stepped away to deal with a delivery. "Will you be all right getting back to the boarding house on your own?" Nora looked up, a spark of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I believe I can manage. Thank you for arranging this." "You'll do the rest yourself," Isaac said with a small smile. "Good luck." He turned to go, but Nora called after him. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Isaac paused, something complicated crossing his face. "I'm not sure. The horse delivery I mentioned, I may need to head out soon." "Oh," Nora tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course." "I'll stop by the boarding house before I leave town," he promised. And then he was gone, the bell over the door jingling in his wake. Nora threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. By the end of the day, she had organized Callahan's chaotic bookkeeping system, created an inventory list, and drafted letters to several suppliers suggesting more favorable terms based on her knowledge of the local market. Callahan was impressed. "Mrs. Matthews, you're a godsend." "Can you come back tomorrow?" "I'd be delighted," Nora said, feeling a rush of pride at being valued for her skills. The walk back to the boarding house in the fading light felt different from her exploration the day before. There was purpose in her step now, and hope for the future. She might actually build a life for herself here, despite Edward's betrayal. As she approached Mrs. Holloway's, she was surprised to see Isaac sitting on the front porch, engaged in conversation with the landlady. Both looked up as she approached. "There she is now, Mrs. Holloway said, rising from her chair. "I'll leave you two to talk." She went inside, giving Nora a surprisingly warm smile as she passed. Isaac stood as Nora climbed the steps. "How did it go with Callahan?" "Very well," she said, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "He's asked me to return tomorrow. I knew he would." There was genuine pleasure in Isaac's eyes. "You're good at what you do." "How would you know that?" Nora asked, curious. "I watched you for a few minutes today." "You have a certain confidence when you're working. It's clear you know what you're doing." Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks, unused to such direct appreciation of her abilities. Edward had taken her work for granted, never acknowledging her contribution to the business. "Thank you." She sat on the porch swing, suddenly aware of how tired she was after a full day of mental exertion. "Will you join me?" Isaac hesitated, then sat beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them. The swing creaked gently as they settled. "I came to say goodbye," he said after a moment. "I need to deliver those horses tomorrow." Although she had been expecting this, Nora felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "How far are you taking them?" "Ranch about 50 miles north of here. Shouldn't take more than a few days round trip. Then you'll be coming back to Austin." She tried to keep the hope from her voice. Isaac looked out at the darkening street. "Hadn't planned on it." "Oh." Nora smoothed her skirt, feeling foolish. Of course he would move on. That was his life, always moving, never staying. "But plans can change," he added, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. They sat in silence for a while, the swing moving gently. In the distance, a piano played from one of the saloons, the notes carrying on the evening breeze. "I want to thank you," Nora finally said. "Not just for the auction, but for everything since, helping me find work, giving me a chance to start over." "You would have found your way," Isaac said. "You're stronger than you think, perhaps, but it would have been much harder without your help." She turned to look at him directly. "Why did you do it, Isaac?" The truth this time. His eyes, shadowed in the fading light, met hers. "I told you I've seen injustice and try to stop it when I can." "Yes, but this was more than that. $500 is a fortune to spend on a stranger." Isaac was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I had a sister, younger than me. After our parents died, I went to war, left her with relatives. When I came back." His jaw tightened. She'd been married off to pay family debts. To a man 3 times her age who worked her like a slave until it killed her. "Oh, Isaac," Nora's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "I was too late to help her," he said, his voice rough with old grief. "I couldn't be too late again." Without thinking, Nora reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the swing between them. His skin was warm and calloused, a working man's hand. After a moment, he turned his palm up and curled his fingers around hers, the gesture tentative, as though he had forgotten the simple comfort of human touch. They sat that way as darkness fell completely, connected by their joined hands and the shared understanding of loss. Finally, Isaac gently withdrew his hand and stood. "I should go. Early start tomorrow." Nora rose as well. "Will you really come back to Austin?" In the dim light from the parlor windows, she saw the conflict in his face. "Would you want me to?" "Yes," she said simply, honestly. "I would." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, the faintest curve of his lips. "Then I will." He lifted his hat briefly, then descended the porch steps and walked away into the night, his tall figure soon swallowed by darkness. Nora remained on the porch for a long time after he had gone, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought Isaac Vaughn into her life, and what it might mean that he had promised to return. The next few days passed in a blur of activity for Nora. She threw herself into her work at Callahan's, grateful for the distraction from thoughts of Isaac. The store was rapidly taking shape under her organized approach, and Callahan was increasingly impressed with her knowledge and efficiency. "Mrs. Matthews, you're a marvel," he declared on the third day as she presented him with a complete inventory system and pricing strategy. "I'd like to offer you a permanent position as my assistant manager. Salary of $30 a month to start, with a review after 3 months. It was a generous offer, more than she had dared hope for. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I accept gratefully." With steady employment secured, Nora began to plan for the future. She moved from the boarding house to a small apartment above the milliner's shop, a modest but private space that she could call her own. She wrote to her cousin Clara with the good news, feeling a weight lifting as she described her new circumstances, omitting, still, the humiliation of the auction. But despite her growing independence and the satisfaction of rebuilding her life, Nora found her thoughts returning often to Isaac Vaughn. She caught herself watching the street from the store window, looking for his tall figure among the passers-by. Each day that passed without his return dimmed her hope a little more. "Expecting someone?" Callahan asked one afternoon, catching her at the window again. "No," Nora said quickly, embarrassed to be caught daydreaming. "Just watching the town." Callahan gave her a knowing look, but didn't press the matter. A week passed, then 2. Nora settled into her new routine, trying to convince herself that Isaac had never truly intended to return to Austin. He was a drifter by his own admission, a man who kept moving rather than putting down roots. Their brief connection had probably meant far more to her than to him. It was nearly 3 weeks after Isaac's departure when the bell above the store door jingled late one afternoon. Nora was at the back, checking a shipment of fabric, and called out, "Be right with you." "No hurry," came a familiar deep voice. Nora froze, her heart suddenly pounding. Slowly she turned to find Isaac Vaughn standing just inside the door, hat in hand. He looked trail-worn and tired, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes, those steel-blue eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You came back," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "I said I would." A small smile touched his lips. "Sorry it took longer than expected. Ran into some trouble with rustlers on the way back." Nora's eyes widened with concern. "Are you all right? Nothing serious?" He glanced around the store. "Place looks good. Callahan must be pleased with your work." "He is." Nora moved toward him, hardly daring to believe he was really there. "He's made me his assistant manager." Pride flashed across Isaac's face. "I knew you'd land on your feet." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Nora felt something shift between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. The moment was broken by Callahan emerging from the storeroom. "Mrs. Matthews, did you finish with that?" He stopped when he saw Isaac. "Well, look who's back in town." "Vaughn, isn't it?" Isaac nodded. "Mr. Callahan. What brings you back to Austin? More horses to deliver?" "No, just some unfinished business." Isaac's eyes flickered briefly to Nora. Callahan glanced between them, then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Matthews, we're almost closing time anyway. Why don't you go ahead and finish up for the day? I can handle locking up." "Are you sure?" Nora asked, though her heart leapt at the opportunity. "Absolutely. You've earned an early day." Callahan's knowing smile suggested he understood exactly what was happening. Nora quickly gathered her shawl and reticule, then joined Isaac at the door. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I'll see you in the morning." Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in golden light. For a moment they stood awkwardly, the ease of their previous interactions momentarily lost. "Have you eaten?" Isaac finally asked. "I've been on the trail for days and could use a decent meal." No, I haven't, Nora said, relieved to have a purpose. The hotel restaurant is still good. They walked side by side, not touching but close enough that Nora was acutely aware of his presence. She had so many questions she wanted to ask, but they all seemed to stick in her throat. At the hotel, they were seated at the same back table they had shared that first day after the auction. It felt like a lifetime ago, though barely a month had passed. "You look well," Isaac said after they had ordered. "Austin agrees with you." "I've been fortunate," Nora admitted. "Thanks to your help. You did the hard part yourself." They fell into easier conversation then, Nora telling him about her work at the store and her new apartment, Isaac relating tales from his journey north and the rustlers he had helped capture. "So what will you do now?" Nora finally asked as they lingered over coffee. "More horses to deliver." Isaac set down his cup, his expression turning serious. "Actually, I've been thinking about staying in Austin for a while." Hope fluttered in Nora's chest. "You have?" "I talked to the livery owner today. He's looking to retire, wants to sell the business. It's a good operation, well established." "You're considering buying it?" Nora couldn't hide her surprise. "I thought you preferred not to stay in one place." Isaac's eyes met hers, open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "I'm tired of moving, Nora. Been doing it too long. Maybe it's time to see what staying feels like." The way he looked at her made it clear that the livery wasn't the only reason he was considering putting down roots in Austin. "I think." Nora's voice caught, and she started again. "I think Austin would be lucky to have you stay." Something like relief crossed his face. "There's a lot to consider. I've never run a business before." "I could help," Nora offered, then flushed at her own boldness. "With the books, I mean. I'm quite good at it, as you know." The smile that spread across Isaac's face was the most unguarded she had seen from him. "I'd like that." As they walked back toward her apartment in the gathering dusk, Nora felt a sense of possibility unfurling between them. Isaac had come back for her, she was almost certain now, and he was considering staying permanently. At the stairs leading up to her apartment, they paused. "Thank you for dinner," Nora said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure." Isaac hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to see the livery tomorrow? I'm meeting the owner again in the morning to discuss terms." "I'd love to," Nora said, her heart lifting. "I'll come by the store at lunchtime if that suits." "Perfect." There was another pause, both of them reluctant to end the evening. Then, with a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance, Isaac took her hand and raised it to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles. "Good night, Nora," he said softly. "Good night, Isaac." Her voice was barely above a whisper. She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch, and knew with sudden clarity that her life had changed irrevocably the moment Isaac Vaughn had torn up that contract. The next few weeks saw a profound transformation in both their lives. Isaac purchased the livery stable, using most of his savings but securing a solid business in a growing town. Under his management, it quickly gained a reputation for fair prices and excellent care of the animals. Nora continued her work at Callahan's while helping Isaac establish proper bookkeeping systems for the livery. They spent most evenings together, sharing meals, talking long into the night, and gradually learning each other's stories. Isaac spoke of his childhood in Virginia, his parents' small farm, his sister Mary who had loved to sing. He told Nora about the war, the horrors he had witnessed, and the weight of survival that had driven him west afterward. The more he shared, the more the shadows seemed to lift from his eyes, as though the simple act of being heard was healing wounds long ignored. In turn, Nora told him of her own past, her happy childhood in Philadelphia, the death of her parents in a fire that had left her dependent on distant relatives, her marriage to Edward at 20 as an escape from their condescension. She even found herself able to speak of the betrayal she had felt upon discovering Edward's gambling and lies. The humiliation of learning that the life she thought she had built was nothing but an illusion. "He never deserved you," Isaac said one evening as they sat on the small balcony outside her apartment, watching the stars emerge. "I didn't know him," Nora admitted. "Not really. I thought I did, but looking back, he always kept part of himself hidden. I was too grateful to question it." "And now," Isaac asked, his voice low, "what do you want now that you're truly free?" Nora considered the question seriously. "Honesty," she finally said. "In all things, I never want to build a life on lies again." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Honesty is a good foundation. There was something in the way he said it, a promise, perhaps, or an invitation that made Nora's heart beat faster. But he didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. They were taking their time, both of them wary of rushing into something that mattered too much to risk. The town took notice of their growing attachment. Nora occasionally overheard whispers as they walked together on Sundays or sat side by side at church. Some were kind, expressing pleasure that the widow Matthews had found companionship after her troubles. Others were less charitable, speculating about what a handsome man like Isaac Vaughn saw in a woman whose husband had left her penniless. Nora tried not to let the gossip affect her, but sometimes the barbs struck home. One afternoon, as she and Isaac were having lunch at the hotel, she noticed several women at a nearby table watching them and whispering behind their hands. "Don't let them bother you," Isaac said, seeing her discomfort. "They think I've set my cap for you because of your business," Nora said quietly. "That I'm trying to secure my future after Edward left me with nothing." Isaac's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Anyone who knows you understands that's not true, do they? I sometimes wonder if I'll ever escape Edward's shadow in this town." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, a public gesture that he knew would be noted and discussed. "Then we'll give them something new to talk about." The warmth of his touch and the defiance in his eyes made Nora smile despite her worries. "You're not afraid of a little gossip, are you, Mr. Vaughn?" "After facing Confederate artillery, town gossips hold little terror," he replied with a wry smile. Their courtship for that was what it had become, though neither had put a name to it, continued through the summer and into the early fall. Isaac's business flourished, and Nora received a raise from Callahan, who declared her indispensable to his operation. They developed comfortable routines: Sunday walks after church, Wednesday evening meals at the hotel, Saturday afternoons when Isaac would close the livery early, and they would ride out of town, Nora on a gentle mare he kept especially for her use. It was on one such Saturday in October, with the leaves beginning to turn and a crispness in the air, that everything changed. They had ridden to a small creek a few miles outside town, a peaceful spot where cottonwoods provided shade and privacy. They spread a blanket by the water and enjoyed the simple picnic. Nora had prepared cold chicken, fresh bread, apple pie from the hotel's kitchen. As they sat watching the water ripple over stones, Isaac suddenly said, "I received a letter yesterday, from Virginia." Nora turned to him, surprised. "From your family, distant cousins," Isaac nodded. "They've offered to buy my parents' old farm. It's been sitting empty since I left for the war, with just a caretaker checking on it occasionally. I've been paying the taxes all these years, but never had the heart to go back or sell it." And now, Isaac looked at her, something vulnerable and hopeful in his eyes. "Now I'm thinking it's time to let go of the past, use the money to build something new." "That sounds wise," Nora said carefully, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts or perhaps his courage. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low and earnest. Nora, I've spent most of my life running from memories, never staying anywhere long enough to make new ones. But these past months in Austin with you, I've started to remember what it feels like to have a home. Nora's heart quickened. Isaac. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I'm not good with words, not like this. But I need you to know that meeting you wasn't just chance. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. It was the best thing that happened to me too, she whispered. I love you, Isaac said simply. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block, holding your head high despite everything. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me. Joy bloomed in Nora's chest, so intense it was almost painful. Are you asking me to marry you, Isaac Vaughn? A smile spread across his face, transforming it completely. I am. Probably not doing it very well, but yes. Then my answer is yes, Nora said, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely. I love you too. Isaac drew her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that spoke of all the longing they had both kept carefully restrained until this moment. They were married 2 weeks later in Austin's small church, with Callahan giving the bride away and Mrs. Holloway sniffling loudly in the front pew. Nora wore a new dress of pale blue silk, a luxury she had allowed herself from her savings, and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. Isaac, in a new black suit that made him look somehow both more distinguished and more uncomfortable than Nora had ever seen him, watched her walk down the aisle with such naked adoration that several of the female guests sighed audibly. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of honesty and faithfulness that meant far more to both of them than the traditional words might have. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in genuine applause even, Nora noted with satisfaction, from those who had once whispered behind their hands. The reception was held at the hotel, where Callahan had insisted on providing champagne for my best employee and her cavalry hero. The celebration lasted well into the evening, the townsfolk's initial reserve giving way to genuine warmth as they witnessed the obvious happiness of the couple. As the festivities wound down, Isaac leaned close to his new wife and whispered, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Vaughn." The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Nora. "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes with a smile that promised everything. They had decided to live in the small but comfortable house behind the livery, which Isaac had spent the past weeks renovating. As he carried her across the threshold insisting on the tradition, despite Nora's laughing protests, she was struck by the care he had taken to make it welcoming. Fresh paint, new curtains, a bookshelf filled with volumes he knew she loved. "It's perfect," she said, taking in the home they would share. "Not yet," Isaac replied, setting her gently on her feet, "but it will be now that you're here." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Nora traced the lines of Isaac's face with gentle fingers, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever think about it?" she asked softly. "That day at the auction." Isaac caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Every day. The best $500 I ever spent. You got more than you bargained for," Nora teased. "I got everything I never knew I needed," he replied seriously, drawing her closer. As she drifted toward sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, Nora reflected on the strange twist of fate that had turned her greatest humiliation into the path to her greatest joy. Edward's debts, meant to destroy her, had instead led her to Isaac. The auction block, intended as her shame, had become the place where her new life began. Sometimes, she thought sleepily, Freedom came in the most unexpected ways, like a contract torn to pieces by a stranger with steel blue eyes and a heart brave enough to love again. Spring came early to Austin in 1876, bringing with it new beginnings for the Vaughns. The livery business had expanded to include a small breeding operation focusing on quality horses for ranchers and cavalry officers alike. Isaac's reputation for fair dealing and expert horsemanship spread throughout the county, bringing customers from as far as San Antonio. Nora had reduced her hours at Callahan's to part-time, devoting the rest of her energy to managing the livery's growing accounts and establishing a small side business offering bookkeeping services to other merchants in town. Between the two ventures, they were building a comfortable life and setting aside savings for the future. That future expanded in ways they hadn't anticipated when Nora discovered she was expecting their first child, due in late summer. The news brought Isaac to his knees. Literally, he had dropped to the floor when she told him, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach as if he might hear the tiny life already. "A baby," he had whispered, his voice filled with wonder and a hint of fear. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Nora had asked, suddenly unsure. They hadn't discussed children, not specifically, though they had spoken vaguely of family in their future. Isaac had looked up at her then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those too. His honesty, as always, reassured her. They would face this new adventure as they had faced everything since finding each other, together with open hearts and clear eyes. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, the town that had once whispered behind her back now embraced her with genuine warmth. Women who had barely acknowledged her after Edward's disgrace now stopped her on the street to offer advice and congratulations. Mrs. Holloway organized a quilting circle to create a blanket for the baby, and Callahan insisted on ordering a special cradle from his furniture supplier in San Antonio. "Never seen a town so excited about one baby," Isaac commented one evening as they sorted through another delivery of hand-knitted items that had appeared on their doorstep. "I think they're happy for us," Nora said, holding up a tiny sweater. "We've become a sort of story to them, the widow and the drifter who found each other and made a home here." "I suppose there are worse things to be known for," Isaac conceded with a smile. The summer of 1876 brought not only the intense heat typical of Central Texas, but also nationwide celebrations of the country's centennial. Austin organized a special Independence Day festival, with parades, speeches, and an evening of fireworks planned. Despite being nearly 8 months pregnant and uncomfortable in the heat, Nora insisted on attending. "This is history," she told Isaac. "Our child's first historical event, even if he or she won't remember it." Isaac didn't argue, but he did arrange for a comfortable seat in the shade near the speaker's platform, and kept her supplied with cool drinks throughout the day. As they watched the fireworks that night, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him, Nora felt a profound sense of belonging. "Happy?" Isaac asked softly, seeming to sense her mood. "Completely," she answered, placing his hand on her rounded belly where their child had just kicked vigorously. "We both are." Joshua Edward Vaughn arrived 2 weeks later on a sweltering August night after a long and difficult labor. The town doctor had been called away to a ranch emergency, leaving only the midwife, Mrs. Pearson, to help bring the baby into the world. Isaac had refused to leave Nora's side, holding her hand through each contraction and wiping her brow with cool cloths as she struggled to bring their child forth. His face, pale with worry but steadfast in his support, was the anchor she clung to through the pain. When their son finally arrived, Red-faced and squalling his displeasure at the world, Isaac wept openly. "He's perfect," he whispered as Mrs. Pearson placed the swaddled infant in Nora's arms. "You're both perfect." They named him Joshua for Isaac's father and Edward not for Nora's first husband but for her own father, a good man whose memory deserved to be honored. Mrs. Pearson pronounced him sturdy as a Texas oak before departing to spread the news through town. By morning, visitors were already arriving with gifts and well wishes. Callahan appeared with a silver rattle and news that he was giving Nora an additional month of paid leave beyond what they had arranged. Mrs. Holloway brought the promised quilt and insisted on holding the baby while Nora rested. Even the mayor stopped by, hat in hand, to congratulate Austin's newest parents and to sheepishly admit that the town council had voted to name a small new park near the livery, Vaughn Green, in honor of the family's contributions to the community. "Seems we've become respectable citizens," Isaac murmured to Nora after the mayor had gone. "Who would have thought?" she replied with a tired smile. "The auction block to the park bench in less than 2 years." Isaac's expression sobered. "Does it ever bother you that some people in town still remember that day?" Nora considered the question seriously before answering. "Not anymore. That auction led me to this life. I can't regret the path, however difficult, that brought us here." He kissed her then, a gentle promise that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to build together. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The livery business continued to grow, eventually requiring Isaac to hire 2 full-time assistants. Nora's bookkeeping service expanded to include teaching accounting to young women who sought independence in the changing economy of the West. Their family grew as well. A daughter, Mary Clara, joined them in 1878, named for Isaac's sister and Nora's cousin. Unlike her placid brother, Mary was spirited from the start, with a determined streak that both delighted and exhausted her parents. "She has your stubbornness," Nora would tell Isaac when their daughter refused to take no for an answer. "And your brains," he would counter, watching Mary methodically sort her blocks by color before she could even speak properly. In 1880, the railroad finally reached Austin, bringing new opportunities and challenges to the growing city. Isaac, always forward-thinking, expanded the livery to include a transport service, using wagons to move goods from the train station to local businesses. That same year brought another son, James Thomas, a quiet, thoughtful child who seemed to observe the world with his father's steady gaze from the moment he was born. Life settled into comfortable patterns, the rhythm of family and work creating a tapestry of ordinary days made extraordinary by the love that bound them together. There were difficult times, a drought that strained their finances, a fever that nearly took Mary from them, the death of Mrs. Holloway, who had become like family, but they weathered each storm together. Through it all, Isaac and Nora maintained the honesty that had formed the foundation of their relationship. They argued sometimes, made mistakes, disappointed each other in the small ways that all couples do. But they always found their way back to each other, stronger for having faced their challenges openly. On a warm evening in the spring of 1885, they sat together on the porch of their home, no longer the small house behind the livery, but a proper residence on a tree-lined street near the school their children attended. Joshua, now 9, was reading to his siblings in the parlor, the sound of his confident young voice carrying through the open windows. 10 years, Isaac said suddenly, taking Nora's hand. "It's been 10 years since that day at the auction block." Nora squeezed his fingers. "The best 10 years of my life. Mine too." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking a lot about that day, about how close I came to riding past Austin altogether. But you didn't, Nora reminded him. You stayed. Because I heard about a widow being auctioned off and couldn't mind my own business, he said with a small smile. Thank God for your interfering nature, Nora teased. Isaac's smile faded, his eyes growing distant with memory. I told you once that I helped you because of my sister, because I was too late to save her. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Nora waited, giving him the space to find his words. I was a mess after the war, he finally continued. Saw too much, did things I'm not proud of. When I found out about Mary, what had happened to her, something broke in me. I started drinking, fighting, looking for ways to punish myself for failing her. He looked down at their joined hands. One night in a town north of here, I got into a brawl with 3 men. Would have been killed if a stranger hadn't stepped in. Older man, retired ranger. He pulled me out of there, sobered me up, and gave me the talking to I needed. What did he say? Nora asked softly. He said I had 2 choices. Keep destroying myself and waste whatever time I had left, or find a way to honor Mary by living the kind of life that would have made her proud. Isaac's voice roughened with emotion. He told me that saving one person might not change the world, but it could change that person's world completely. Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes. So when you heard about the auction, I thought maybe this was what that old ranger meant, a chance to make a difference for one person. Isaac met her gaze, his eyes filled with wonder even after all these years. I never imagined how much difference that one person would make to me. Nora leaned forward and kissed him gently. We saved each other, I think. From inside the house came the sound of childish laughter, then Joshua's voice calling, Pa, Ma, James says a horse can count, but I told him that's impossible. Who's right? Isaac chuckled. Duty calls. As they rose to go inside, Nora paused, struck by the fullness of the life they had built together. From the ashes of her first marriage and the wandering emptiness of Isaac's post-war existence, they had forged something beautiful, a family, a home, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. What is it? Isaac asked, noticing her hesitation. Just thinking about how far we've come, she said, and how grateful I am for every step of the journey. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with happiness. Even the auction block, especially the auction block, Nora confirmed, taking his hand again. After all, that's where I found the only thing I've ever truly needed you. Together, they went inside to settle the great horse-counting debate, surrounded by the joyful chaos of the family they had created, and the love that had begun on the day a cowboy had torn up a contract and set a woman free. Over the decades that followed, Austin grew from a frontier town into a thriving city, and the Vaughn family grew with it. Isaac's livery evolved into a successful transportation company that eventually included automobiles when they began to appear on Texas roads. Nora's bookkeeping service expanded into a small accounting firm that she proudly handed over to their daughter Mary when she retired. Their children followed diverse paths. Joshua became a lawyer with a passion for defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Mary took over the family business and expanded it with remarkable acumen. James pursued his love of learning and became a professor at the new university in Austin. Through it all, Isaac and Nora remained the steady center of the family, their partnership a model for their children and grandchildren. They weathered the turn of the century, marveled at new inventions, mourned friends who passed, and celebrated as their family expanded with marriages and births. In 1915, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a gathering that filled their home with 4 generations of family and friends. Joshua proposed a toast that brought tears to many eyes. To my parents, who taught us that love isn't just about finding the right person, but about two people who never stopped trying to be right for each other. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Isaac and Nora slipped away to sit on their favorite bench in Vaughn Green, the small park that still bore their name. 40 years, Nora mused, her hand resting comfortably in Isaac's. Though they were both in their 70s now, silver-haired and slower of step, the connection between them remained as strong as ever. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far?" Isaac smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I hoped. From the moment you said yes to marrying me, I hoped for exactly this, a lifetime together, watching our family grow, building something that would last. We did build something lasting, didn't we?" Nora gazed around at the park where their grandchildren played, at the streets of the city that had become truly home. "More than the business, more than the house or the money we've saved," Isaac agreed. "We built a legacy of love that will continue long after we're gone." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that the frightened widow on the auction block and the haunted drifter who had saved her had found not just each other, but their true selves in the life they had created together. "The best $500 you ever spent?" she asked, echoing his words from long ago. Isaac turned to look at her, his eyes filled with the same devotion they had held on their wedding day. "The only worthwhile investment I ever made," he corrected. "Everything else was just money. You, my love, were the beginning of everything that mattered." As the sun set over Austin, casting long shadows across the park that bore their name, Isaac and Nora Vaughn sat hand in hand, their shared history a testament to the truth they had discovered together. That sometimes freedom comes disguised as loss, that healing often begins with pain, and that love, honest, enduring love, can transform even the darkest moment into the first step toward a lifetime of light.